Hello everyone, welcome to my channel TechQuest Learning Point. I hope you all are doing great. I am Bashar. This is the 6th episode of AZ900 Microsoft Azure Fundamentals series. Last episode I discussed about Azure fundamental concepts. The link of these previous tutorials is given in the description box. You can watch it if required. Today I am going to start a discussion on Azure Architectural Components. I have tried to make clear the concepts of architecture of the Azure Cloud Computing Platform, including Azure regions, region pairs and availability zones, Azure Resources, resource groups, and Azure Resource Manager and Azure Subscriptions and management groups. I can assure that we will all be benefited from this tutorial to make the preparation on the exam AZ900 Microsoft Azure Fundamentals. The ultimate target of this tutorial is to make you prepare for the exam AZ900 Microsoft Azure Fundamentals. If anyone want to be the Microsoft Certified Azure Fundamentals, this tutorial will be right choice for them to make clear the exam AZ900 Microsoft Azure Fundamentals because I followed the Microsoft Learning Paths for Azure Fundamentals exam. Now I want to talk a little bit about the content of this tutorial. In this tutorial I am going to discuss on the Azure Architectural Components. That means you will learn about the concepts and terminology for several of the core Azure architecture components that will make the basic level of understanding for Azure architecture. In this tutorial, the various concepts, resources and terminology that are necessary to work with Azure architecture will be described elaborately. We will learn about Azure Subscriptions and Management Groups, Resource Groups, and Azure Resource Manager, as well as Azure Regions and Availability Zones. In Azure, we need to know the organizing structure for resources, which has 4 levels such as Management Groups, Subscription, Resource Groups, and Resources. Look into the diagram. Here shows the top-down hierarchy of organization for 4 levels: management groups, subscriptions, resource groups, and resources. Resources are instances of services that you create like virtual machines, storage, or SQL databases. Resource groups. Resources are combined into resource groups, which act as a logical container into which Azure resources like web apps, databases, and storage accounts are deployed and managed. Subscriptions. A subscription groups together use accounts and the resources that have been created by those user accounts. For each subscription, there are limits or quotas on the amount of resources that you can create and use. Organizations can use subscriptions to manage cost and the resources that are created by users, teams, or projects. Management groups. These groups help you manage access policy and compliance for multiple subscriptions. All subscriptions in a management group automatically inherit the conditions applied to the management group. Azure regions. A region is a geographical area on the planet that contains at least one but potentially multiple data centers that are nearby and networked together with a low latency network. Azure intelligently assigns and controls the resources within each region to ensure workloads are appropriately balanced. So we can say Azure regions comprises one or many data centers. Now question is that what is data center? An Azure data center is a unique physical building that contains thousands of physical servers with its own power, cooling, and networking infrastructure. These data centers are located all over the globe. As of November 2020, there are over 160 plus Azure data centers worldwide. The data center is the building blocks of global Azure infrastructure. In simply, an Azure region is a set of data centers that are connected through a dedicated low latency network. An Azure geography is an area of the world that contains one or more Azure regions. India, United States, United Kingdom are examples of Azure geography. The geography India contains three regions, such as Region 1 is Central India located at Pune, Region 2 is South Central India located at Hyderabad, and Region 3 is South India located at Chennai. The all available regions as of June 2022, such as West US, Canada Central, West Europe, Australia East, and Japan West, are shown in the diagram. In Asia Pacific geography, two regions are available. Region 1 is East Asia located at Hong Kong, and Region 2 is Southeast Asia located at Singapore. Each region contains three number of available zones. Some services or VM features, such as specific VM sizes or storage types, are only available in certain regions. If anyone wants to use these services, that particular regions must be selected. But some global Azure services, such as Azure Active Directory, Azure Traffic Manager, and Azure DNS, there is no need to select any particular regions. So, it is clear that you need to select regions for some Azure services and you don't require to select regions some other else. Microsoft Azure established more global regions than any other cloud provider with the flexibility to bring applications closer to users no matter where you are. Global regions provide better selectivity, scalability, and redundancy. Besides, Microsoft Azure provides a special type of regions that can be used when anyone wants to build out applications for compliance or legal purposes, such as US DoD Central, US GOV Virginia, US GOV Loa, and China East, China North. Availability zone. Availability zones are physically separate data centers within a Azure region. Each availability zone is made up of one or more data centers equipped with independent powered cooling and networking. An availability zone is set up to be an isolation boundary. If one zone goes down, the other continues working. Availability zones are connected through high-speed private fiber optic networks. Azure availability zones are physically separate locations within each Azure region that are tolerant to local failures. Failures can range from software and hardware failures to events such as earthquakes, floods, and fires. Tolerance to failures is achieved because of redundancy and logical isolation of Azure services. To ensure resiliency, a minimum of 3 separate availability zones are present in all availability zone enabled regions. Azure availability zones are connected by a high performance network with a round trip latency of less than 2 milliseconds. They help your data stay synchronized and accessible when things go wrong. Each zone is composed of one or more data centers equipped with independent power cooling and networking infrastructure. Availability zones are designed so that if one zone is affected, regional services capacity and high availability are supported by the remaining two zones. Azure regions are designed to offer protection against localized disasters with availability zones and protection from regional or large geography disasters with disaster recovery by making use of another region. Region pairs. Each Azure region is always paired with another region within the same geography, such as US, Europe, or Asia, at least 300 miles away. This approach allows for the replication of resources such as VM storage across a geography that helps reduce the likelihood of interruptions because of events at once. If a region in a pair was affected by a natural disaster, for instance, services would automatically fail over to other region in each region pair. Examples of region pairs in Azure are West US paired with East US and Southeast Asia paired with East Asia. Because the pair of regions is directly connected and far enough apart to be isolated from regional disasters, you can use them to provide reliable services and data redundancy. Some services offer automatic geo-redundant storage by using region pairs. Most regions in a geography are paired to ensure business continuity and disaster recovery (BCDR). A regional pair consists of two regions within the same geography. However, there is one exception to this. Brazil South region is paired with South Central US region, which obviously is outside of Brazil's geography. Azure Resources. In Azure, a resource is an entity managed by Azure. Virtual machines, virtual networks, and storage accounts are all examples of Azure Resources. It is a manageable item that's available through Azure. So it is clear that the resource is nothing but an Azure service, such as App Service, Azure Storage, Azure Active Directory, etc. It means whenever you create a new resource, you are actually creating an Azure service. Azure Resource Group, a container that holds related resources for an Azure solution. The resource group includes resources that you want to manage as a group. You decide which resources belong in a resource groups based on what makes the most sense for your organization. It is important to keep in mind that all resources must be in a resource group, and a resource can only be a member of a single resource group. Many resources can be moved between resource groups, with some services having specific limitations or requirements to move. Resource groups cannot be nested. Before any resource can be provisioned, you need a resource group for it to be placed in. Each resource in Azure must belong to a resource group. A resource group is a logical container that associates multiple resources so you can manage them as a single entity based on lifecycle and security. So we can say that the Azure Resource Group is a collection of resources. The resource group is the container in which multiple Azure services reside. Every Azure service must be located in the resource group. The resource group gives better flexibility to manage the life cycle of all services at one place, which is located in the resource group. You can deploy, update, and delete these services together. If you delete a resource group, all resources contained within it are also deleted. Organizing resources by lifecycle can be useful in non-production environments where you might try an experiment and then dispose of it. Resource groups make it easy to remove a set of resources all at once. Authorization. Resource groups are also a scope for applying role-based access control (RBAC) permissions. By applying RBAC permissions to a resource group, you can easy administration, and limit access to allow only what's needed. Azure Resource Manager. Azure Resource Manager is the deployment and management service for Azure. It provides a management layer that enables you to create, update, and delete resources in your account. You use management features like access control logs and tags to secure and organize your resources after deployment. So we can say Azure Resource Management is nothing but a service where you can deploy and manage the resources as per requirement. In your Azure account, the Azure Resource Manager provides the facilities to create, update, and delete the resources, and also manage access control logs and tags to secure resources. When a user sends a request from any of the Azure tools, APIs, or SDKs, Resource Manager receives the request. It authenticates and authorizes the request. Resource Manager sends the request to Azure service, which takes the requested action. Because all requests are handled through the same API, you see consistent result and capabilities in all the different tools. The benefit of using Resource Manager. Manage your infrastructure through declarative templates rather than scripts. A Resource Manager template is a JSON file that defines what you want to deploy to Azure. Deploy, manage, and monitor all the resources for your solution as a group rather than handling these resources individually. Redeploy your solution throughout the deployment lifecycle and have confidence your resources are deployed in a consistent state. Define the dependencies between resources so they are deployed in the correct order. Apply access control to all services because RBAC is natively integrated into the management platform. Apply tags to resources to logically organize all the resources in your subscription. Clarify your organization's billing by viewing cost of a group of resources that share the same tag. In Azure, we have learned that Azure includes a front end with services that orchestrate Azure's function. One of these services is Azure Resource Manager. This service hosts the RESTful API clients used to manage resources. Azure Resource Manager requires the client to specify an identifier for both the subscription and the resource group to manage the virtual machine resources. Once you understand how Azure Resource Manager works, you can learn how to associate an Azure subscription with the Azure Resource Manager controls. Before Azure Resource Manager can execute any resource management request, review the following set of controls. The first control is that a validated user must make a request. Also, Azure Resource Manager must have a trusted relationship with Azure Active Directory, Azure AD, to provide user identity functionality. Azure Subscription. A subscription provides you with authenticated and authorized access to Azure products and services. It also allows you to provision resources. An Azure subscription is a logical unit of Azure services that links to an Azure account, which is an identity in Azure Active Directory, Azure AD, or in a directory that Azure AD trusts. So it is clear that if anyone wants to be authenticated and authorized access to Azure products and services, he or she must have a subscription through an Azure account. An account can have one subscription or multiple subscriptions that have different billing models and to which you apply different access management policies. You can use Azure Subscriptions to define boundaries around Azure products, services, and resources. There are two types of subscription boundaries that you can use. Billing boundary. This subscription is used to determine the billing type of an Azure account for using Azure. Multiple subscriptions can be used for different types of billing requirements. As per subscription, separate billing reports and invoices for each subscription can be generated so that Azure users costing can be organized and managed transparently. Access control boundary. In Azure, access management policy is applied through a subscription, and different subscription is created to manage and reflect different organizational structures. As per examples, let's consider a business where different departments are available and need to apply distinct Azure subscription policies. This billing model allows you to manage and control access to the resources that users provision with specific subscription. Multiple subscription can be organized in the invoice sections as per requirement. Subscription-wise charges incurred that month is shown on the invoice section of an invoice. For example, you might need a single invoice for your organization but want to organize charges by department, team, or project. As per requirement, multiple invoices can be generated within the same billing account. To do this, additional billing profile is required to create where each billing profile has its own monthly invoice and payment method. Azure Management Groups. If your organization has many subscriptions, you might need a way to efficiently manage access policies and compliance for those subscriptions. Azure Management Groups provide a level of scope above subscriptions. You organize subscriptions into containers called management groups and apply your governance conditions to the management groups. All subscriptions within a management group automatically inherit the conditions applied to the management group. Management groups give you enterprise-grade management at a large scale no matter what type of subscription you might have. All subscriptions within a single management group must trust the same Azure AD tenant. So it is clear that Azure Management Groups is defined as a logical container by means of which multiple subscriptions are organized and efficiently managed access policies and compliance for those subscriptions. In short, Azure Management Group is nothing but a logical container. A policy applied to a management group can limit the regions available for VMs creation. This policy would be applied to all management groups, subscriptions, and resources under the management group by only allowing VMs to be created in that region. We know that an Azure Management Groups is logical containers that allow Azure administrators to manage access, policy, and compliance across multiple Azure subscriptions. By means of management groups, Azure subscription tree can be created and that can be used with several other Azure services, including Azure Policy and Azure Role-Based Access Control. We also know that Azure Management Groups provide flexibility for organizing policy, access control, and compliance access across multiple subscriptions. We can nest Azure Management Groups up to 6 levels deep for efficient management of resources. You can build a flexible structure of management groups and subscriptions to organize your resources into a hierarchy for unified policy and access management. At the last stage of this tutorial, I want to review full tutorial in terms of the following topics: Azure Subscriptions. Azure Subscription is a base container that comprises a group of related business or technical resources. Azure Subscriptions, which authenticates and authorizes the resources linked with an Azure account. Azure Management Groups. Azure Management Groups is a way in which you can efficiently manage access policies and compliance of subscriptions, and it provides a level of scope above subscriptions. Azure Resources. Azure Resource is nothing but an Azure service such as App Service, Azure Storage, Azure Active Directory, etc. It means whenever you create a new resource, you can actually creating the Azure service. Azure Resource Groups. The Azure Resource Group is the collection of resources. The resource group is a container in which multiple Azure services reside. Azure Resource Manager. Azure Resource Management is nothing but a service where you can deploy and manage the resources as per requirement. In your Azure account, the Azure Resource Manager provides the facilities to create, update and delete the resources, and also manage access control logs and tags to resource. Azure Regions. Azure Region is a set of data centers that are connected through a dedicated low latency network. A region is a geographical area on the planet that contains at least one but potentially multiple data centers that are nearby and networked together with a low latency network. Region pairs. Each Azure region is always paired with another region within the same geography at least 300 miles away. Availability zones. Availability zones are physically separate data centers within an Azure region. Each availability zone is made up of one or more data centers equipped with independent power, cooling, and networking. Data center. The data center is the building blocks of global Azure infrastructure. A data center is a unique physical building that contains thousands of physical servers with own power, cooling, and networking infrastructure. These data centers are located all over the globe. Azure geography. Azure geography is an area of the world that contains one or more Azure regions. India, United States, United Kingdom are examples of Azure geography. Thank you for watching this tutorial. I hope you all have been able to take the idea about the Azure Architectural Components. If you think this tutorial is helpful for learning the Azure Cloud Computing, please click on the like button and request you all to share it more and more to the persons who are searching the tutorial like this. If you have any questions on this tutorial, opinions and queries about this channel, please type this in the comment box. You also mail to me. In the description box, email ID is given. Kindly subscribe this channel and click on the bell button so that you can get notification when new tutorial is published.